Hello and welcome. Got a new configuration going on here. I spent the weekend playing around with adding a secondary desktop to my configuration. So now I'm going to be working out of my primary laptop, but all the streaming and encoding is going on a secondary laptop. So let's hope that this fixes some of the drop packets we've been having and drop screens. I'll keep an eye on it, but the last time I tested it, it worked fine for a good 5 or 10 minutes. So let's get started. Here we are going to cover this contact application. If you haven't been following along, you can check out the outline here. The outline kind of covers step by step what we've been doing with links to all the previous videos. So here you see we talked about the introduction to IDEs, where we talked about Visual Studio Code, JetBrains Writer, then we introduced a model. We then went and introduced the business / management / service layer. And you can go and click on any of the videos or see any bits of the code that was added by clicking on the commits. We then started working on the data layer, where we added SQLite to it, Entity Framework Core, and established some Entity Framework migrations. We then started adding a bunch of unit tests to it. Apparently I need to fix this link, where we were able to validate that everything worked. However, while everything worked, we were actually adding and removing data from the database, which is not exactly what you want for unit tests. So what we're going to start doing today is working on doing dependency injection, which is not in this outline. I originally wanted to cover it earlier, but I think now is going to be the time. So we're going to put a little block within here and introduce another. Can you not see me, Woody? I got to keep an eye on the camera to the side until I find a way to have them both on the screen, but oh, okay, good. But the side has where all the monitoring is. I'll find out a better configuration so I can see it without turning my head like this. So figure right in here is where we would put the adding dependency layer. So let's go take a look at the app. So we have a console app, which we were using during the very early stages to test out that the functionality was working with it. If we open up our program.cs, you'll see a whole bunch of console write lines and stuff where we actually go and call our contact manager. We want to go and get rid of that, and we added a bunch of unit tests to it. So last week we added unit tests, and this gave us unit tests for all of our functions, tested both the what are called negative scenarios and the positive scenarios. So here, get contact with an invalid ID should return null. If we run through all of our test cases to verify they are working, which I probably should have did before we started, but I haven't changed anything since the last commit, so all these should come up as a success. You also notice they run a lot faster this time with me offloading everything onto the secondary machine. This machine is actually acting like it normally does. So now we're going to introduce dependency injection. What dependency injection is, in easy terms, is instead of the application having a hard dependency on something, we are going to tell it what dependency to use. Think of it as if you're driving a car, or you need to get from point A to point B, and you have to take a car there. You don't necessarily need to know what kind of car you're going to take, although it's nicer to have some nicer, newer cars. But someone's going to give you a car to go, just like an airplane. You're going to fly from point A to point B. You don't necessarily know what kind of jet you're going to be on. The airline is going to provide that piece for you. Same thing with applications. So a common use of this is for logging. You're going to tell the class itself. So in the example of our data class, we're going to tell it here, this is the logger you're going to use. We haven't introduced logging yet. We'll do that probably in a future episode. But for our logic or a business manager, instead of us hard coding the database context that we're going to use, we are going to inject that into the application by telling it to go and use this app. So in order to do that, we need to define an interface for that application, or for what we're going to inject. We don't want to inject a concrete class. We want to inject interfaces, because you might have a different implementation for it, just like the cars. If I go out to my driveway now, I have a choice of a Passat, a Jetta, or a Terrain. I don't know which one it is. I just need an I car, and I go and take it. So for a logic manager, we are going to pass it in an I data class, which we don't have right now. We're going to have to create. So let's go to our models and see. Right now, all of our domain models are just sitting there in the domain. So what I typically like to do is have a separate function for it. So we're going to add a folder right now for all the models and put them in a separate folder called models. And then we're going to use a nice little trick of Writer, or if you have JetBrains or CodeRush in Visual Studio, we're going to move this to a different class. So I'm going to do a refactor this, and we're going to do a move to folder, and then we are going to put it in the models folder. And what did I do? Context.domain select preserve. Oh, because I don't mind. It should have it right in there. Specify how to create, preserve, put classes into separate files, fix namespaces. Why can't I see them? Let's try this. Refactor. Move types to matching files, move to folder, domain dot models. Why can't you see that file? Let's just do it the easier way. Drag and drop. It's going to confirm the action. Now I'm going to get a bunch of this doesn't match. So if I do option, we're going to move it to model, and that's going to go and move it everywhere. The same thing here. There's an actual easier way to do it, but I couldn't figure it out. I think there's actually, I can do a right click in here and do it. I think if I do it this way, nope, I'll figure that out eventually. And then phones is right, and then this. Now that went all throughout the solution and fixed it, and I can tell, make sure that all the unit tests run, which is why we created these unit tests. So now I'm going to go and hit play and make sure that all of our tests pass. You'll notice that they did have a little question mark underneath them to show they didn't pass. So now I moved it. I haven't broken the application yet, which is a good thing. This is why it's important to create unit tests, especially if you're going to do frequent refactors like we are going to be doing a lot on this stream. So what's the next step? You're going to create an interface here. So let's go and add a new directory and call it interfaces. Now we're going to create a new interface for the data project because we want this to be shared across. So let's go here to our context. Actually, no, let's do the the context. Context is typically pretty hard to inject, but we're going to do it, and then we're going to add it to the manager class. So luckily Writer has a shortcut for that. So I am going to, I think it's generate code, create derived type, create another department type. Let's try the generate code. Nope. There is a refactor to an interface command, which all constructor navigate to refactor this. Extract interface is what I want. So when you do extract interface, it's going to say, what do you want to call it? By convention, interfaces. Hey, John, how you doing? Thanks for joining. You can see Woody, if he's still on, he's in the chat too. I'm sure you two know each other. So interfaces are typically, by convention, start with an I. So by default, you want it to stay the same name. So here we're just going to call it I contact, and then I have the ability to select everything I want for it. Typically, I'm not going to go and do that because it's a lot of work to create an interface for a DB context. So we're going to break it out slightly differently. So here we are going to say that we want to, within our contact manager, we are going to rename this. Actually, let's go and do it a little bit differently. The logic layer has a lot of our business intelligence and uses a database to get to it. Let's say we start with the what's called repository pattern, and let's go and change this DB context. We're going to go and rename this class altogether and actually move it to a different namespace for our SQLite, because eventually we're going to move this off of SQLite into an actual, or not an actual, but a different type of database, whether it be SQL Server or DocumentDB or something like that. We don't want our connections to know about it. So let's go and add a new project. And let's give it a class library, and we're going to do .NET Standard because we want this to be shared. And then do context.data.SQLite because our DB context now is an instance of SQLite. So if I do this, I could do a file rename and a bunch of other stuff in here, but that's a pain in the butt. So I'm just going to go and move this here now. And move this here now, and we're going to ignore the reds for a bit. I'll fix them up eventually. Delete this class because we don't need that. Now we have a contact data with nothing in there. Let's create a repository that allows us to get to it. So our repository is going to look a lot like this contact manager. The only difference is we're not going to have a lot of this data validation in there. That belongs in the business layer, not so much your repository. So what I am going to do is do some copy and paste magic. So we're going to select all, and we are going to create a new class here, and we shall call it contact repository. Yes, I will add it to Git. And now let's cheat. Paste this here and call this a repository. Now we're good with the repository. We're going to ignore this for a minute because we're going to go through and inject that piece into the code. So let's start here with our repository, and let me get rid of all the other stuff that we don't need, and that's all these validation rules we created, because we're going to make the bold assumption that it is passed in from the business layer, that this is only being called through our business layer. And well, that validation will actually keep. And then I am going to extract this into an interface. And that was Alt-Enter, refactor this, extract to an interface, and I want all the public methods. We're going to create it in its own file and click Next. No, I don't want to edit yet, only because I am going to move this interface to here. The reason why you move it to the domain class is domain class is shared across between all the different classes, and that's how we allow ourselves to be able to talk to each other. The domain class kind of knows all the models that are around the entire infrastructure of the application. Ultimately, we'll get the contact context into that overall mix. So let's go and fix this. This already knows that it's in the other class, it's referenced. I should be good to go. So far, contact repository is good. What are you complaining about? Oh, DB context, we need the entity framework stuff in here. So let's go and add in our entity framework stuff. And I want to check for the solution. It's in the data class, and I will add it to that class. In a couple of seconds, most of those greens went away, and now just the domain classes out are red. Now, depending on how complicated we want to get for this, for now we're going to reference the domain class. In the future, we're actually going to take this out and totally separate the domain that's being used for the web API that we're going to build or the desktop applications, and have a different model for the database or the data store that we're using. That allows for more flexibility. So if you need to change, let's say, a file size or the location, your main application doesn't have to change at all. So we'll go through and fix that in the future. So let's go and use our function here. Hey, why can't you reference? Let's do add reference and choose the domain. Let's get rid of these. How you doing, John and Chris? Still there? Now that we have these here, we are going to move this to the right namespace, and then we'll probably move the migrations to the correct namespace too, just because I hate these squiggly lines all over the place. Cool. Now this should be good. It's only red because it's not in Git, and I'll add it to Git once we catch up with everything. So now we have the context here. We have a repository. The repository should have the database context passed into it. So for this, I forgot how I did it. Hold on, I'm going to open up another sample project that I've been working on that actually has this implemented. Oh no, a black screen, what happened? It's just Ryder loading up the new solution, hopefully. Eventually. We'll come back to that in a second. Now our contact manager has all these context references to it, but we're going to want to tell it not even to bother with that. We are going to tell it to, we want you to bring in an I contact repository, and we are going to call it contact repository. And then instead of private read-only contact context, let's get rid of that one. We are going to do a private read-only underscore contact repository. And then here we are going to assign it. Oops, sorry. We're going to assign it here. This is what is called dependency or constructor injection. It's not complete yet, but this sets us up for it. We still need something to go and do the actual injection. That means, hey, when someone wants an instance of contact manager is going to require a contact repository. How do I get that? So we have to craft up what's called the dependency graph, and we'll get to that in a little bit. I just want to kind of clean up some of this code so that we can get to it a lot easier. So now everywhere where we have these contacts.find, etc., we are going to just change them to the appropriate method. So in this case, we have a contact repository.getContact method. And you see a lot of this is just repetitive code. And yes, it kind of is repetitive code, but you'll see some benefits later on. And if you started out with dependency injection in mind, a lot of this extra work that I'm doing now doesn't happen. And since this is the manager, and this manager is what's cleaning up everything or doing all the work, we want it to do all the validation too. So let me do this, return underscore contact repository dot delete, what am I in? Get contacts. And then I think it's first name, comma, last name. And then save contacts, return or retune underscore dot save, and then contact. And then this is return contact dot delete contact. Okay, so now we cleaned up this and got rid of all the red squiggly lines and everything, but we can't run it because the contact repository is not totally set. So let's add a reference to this class, and we are going to look at how we can get that in a second. Forgot to rename the constructor. Oops. This should be contact repository. And this is, I think, during the copy paste, I didn't include system.reference. So now just about everything should be working. I only have 2 more files with the red squiggly lines. So let's take a look at our test, what's complaining. You notice now everywhere where contact is, it's red because Contact Manager now has a constructor that requires the usage of the repository. So we are going to start this now with poor man's dependency injection. We'll create a better one in a couple of minutes. So let's do public or private read only, and this is going to be an iContact repository, and call it contact repository. And then let's create a constructor for the class, what do I call a class? Contact Manager. Some of this is going to be extra work. If you're using Web API or a Windows native app, or sorry, Web API or a web app, there's built-in dependency injection. For now, we're going to fake it, and then we'll go and add it probably later today or tomorrow, depending on time. So now we have this here. I am going to set the contact repository equal to a new contact repository, and then everywhere where it's referenced, we are going to change it to this. Oops, we're going to do new contact manager. And then there's 17 cases. Let's replace all. That is poor man's dependency injection, or poor lady, or poor person, depending on your preference. Now, if I run this, everything should work except for the contact, except for the console app. So let's go and do the same thing here, except this only calls it in one place. So I can do that. Now I should be able to build the application. Everything's in your neck of the wood, Chris, John. Heard Ohio's getting some crazy weather, as well as parts of Michigan today. I don't know what it's like in KC. And did the app build? Build succeeded. I think that was the last build. Why are you not building? What did I miss? Code. Build. Oh, Shift Control B. Hit the wrong build. I get confused on shortcuts with the Mac so often. Oh. Got a package version difference in one of these 313. There must have been a new version of it. So let's go and check this project out. See what version it has. I'm guessing 314. Let's go back to my NuGet and make sure that we're all in this same. You can't see this? Yeah. There's an update. If I move my head or move this screen over, you'll see that context data needed to be upgraded. There was obviously a push to Entity Framework SQLite dependency to 314. So we're going to get a little complaining about that. Go and rebuild the project. Built successfully. So now if I run my unit test, everything should pass. And everything passed. So I did a major refactor. Granted, the project's small, but we went and moved the class to its own dependency for SQL. For SQLite, we created a different contact repository, and then we created a separate repository that the contact manager is looking at. So in order to turn this into a quote-unquote true dependency injection, we are going to need to do two more things to it. And some of these might be different depending on your preferences, but this is how I kind of like to do it. So I am going to create another interface, and this one's very similar to the contact repository. So I am going to duplicate that, but not call it repository, but call it data store. And this is going to allow us the ability to go and inject different types of databases or data stores within our code. As long as you support these methods, you're going to be good to go. So let's go and in our SQLite, let's go and add a new class. Let's call this class contact data store. This class is going to inherit from, wait for it, I contact data store. What do I call it? I contact. I'm not make it public. Yeah, I did. What are you complaining about? Make partial. Oh, I forgot to change the name of it. So let's go and fix you up. You should be in interfaces, and you really should be I contact data store, which meant you're in the wrong area too. Now this should inherit I contact data store, and I'm going to be cheap and tell it to implement all the missing members for me, anything that's public. So now they're all there. So if I look here in our contacts, the contacts have all, or sorry, the repository has all of the entity framework specific stuff, but I don't want the repository to know about the implementation, because later on when we change this to a SQL server, we might use Dapper. If we change it to using Cosmo DB, we are going to use their SDK for it. So the repository shouldn't care about it. It just says, hey, go get me this. So we are going to cheat one more time and take all this out. So I'm going to cut this so I don't have to bother changing a bunch of stuff. Go back to our data store and replace it all. It's complaining about the contacts, but that's because I didn't copy it. So let's go back to that and copy that out. Where are you? And this should be contact store. And yes, I will add you. So now we're good to go. Now within our repository needs to know what data source it needs. So we are going to inject an iContext data store, and then we need to tell it where, create the variable for it. So let's do private read only, and this is going to be an iContact data store, and then underscore contact data store. My tabbing is off, so let's go and fix that because that's going to bother me. Why is this off? It's off. I'll fix the formatting in a second. And we're going to do contact data store equals contact data store. And I think everything's good. Let's implement all these members. And as you could imagine, this is going to be iContact data store .get contact .contact ID, and we want to return it. So I am going to copy and paste this so I don't have to keep typing. .get contacts. And .get contacts, first name, comma, last name. You're probably wondering why is there all this extra code? It's actually a lot of extra code right now. The sample that we had before was working and worked well for what it did. But we're kind of future-proofing this application a little bit, only because I know where we're going to go. If we did this later on in the process, it would have been a lot harder to do. So this is going to allow us some more flexibility in changing it out. You'll hear a lot of talk about, how much extra work do you want to do, or how much code should you be writing for your solving the requirements, or Should I write extra to future proof? In most cases, I say write the smallest amount of code that you possibly can, because there's no need to write anything extra. I'm only writing it now because I know we're going to be doing a lot of other things, so I want to make sure we are ready for it. So I got rid of the unknown or the unneeded usings here. I can actually get rid of some of the dependencies here too, because we're no longer directly dependent on SQLite for this package. Ultimately, it would be because it's referencing the application. But once we get away from the poor man's dependency injection and introduce a web API to this or something else that actually has it built in, we'll be able to get rid of that, all those dependencies. So each class only has a dependency to what they need. So if we are good to go, let me make sure that the data store class does what it needs to do. Yes. This is all good. So I just need to update these, and this wants a new contract data store. So this should be a new, normally I would name these a little bit more specifically, so I am going to do that now. It should be SQLite data store, only because they start to get a little messy when you have the words all the same. And it makes it a little bit clearer here when we're doing a new SQLite. Darn it, named it the wrong thing. Should be SQLite data store. Hey, notice writer also renamed the files. So now if I come here, I just do new SQLite data store, and I am good to go. I rename this SQLite data store, and let's fix the formatting a little bit. And if I build it, they should all come. I have almost perfected the 1 12-ounce beverage. In this case, it's just plain seltzer or soda water per every talk. It's like a 15-minute interval. I seem to drink about 3 ounces per gulp. So that's all good. Let's go and check our unit test and make sure they work. And they all passed, so everything was good to go. Ha! Have fun drinking a beer, buddy. I'm still, what am I? We're in May now, so 8.5, 9 months sober. I went to doctor today, my cardiologist, for my 9-month checkup, and all my numbers are great. He wants me to keep on the meds for a little bit more, and hopefully in 6 months or November I can come off the meds. Okay, so let's just run this app here, the program, to see if it still runs. If we remember correctly, a lot of this just returns console stuff. So we should see it here. Yep, it ran, it returned the first result and then multiple other contacts and the searches for it. So our application successfully works. Thanks, Woody. We have refactored out, implemented a poor person's dependency injection for it by just doing the constructor type. Tomorrow's stream, we are going to take this another level with our unit test. So if you remember part of a previous stream, you look at some of our testing here. During our console app, we commented out a bunch of code so that it wasn't constantly reading and writing to the database during our console while we were testing it. Then we introduced some unit tests, but towards the end of the unit tests, where we worked on save contacts, we are actually going and saving the contacts. Where are we? Save contact with anniversary with valid contact. So right here, we are truly saving a contact, and we don't want to, our unit test should only be responsible for testing out what we call the logic or the contact manager level. It shouldn't be testing out your database. That's an integration test, which we'll cover a lot further in the future. But tomorrow we're going to look at a way to introduce a concept called mocking or faking to the manager test cases, so that we're actually not truly saving and editing. If we go and look at the database tables here, you'll see we went and added a bunch. We're at 25. If I run our unit test again, oops, hit the wrong button. If we run our unit test again and refresh this, we'll be up to 26 or 27 because I ran the other one. So we're going to get away from having the need to go and actually read and write to the database for that. If you want a little preview of it, you can come back here and take a look at this mocks. We're going to introduce mocks, definitely. That might take us the first half hour or so. If we have time left, we will experiment with Microsoft Fakes. I've never used it before, so we'll learn it together. That being said, that is all I have for this stream. Once we get rid of the mocks and faking, we'll start with working on an API. That's when we'll truly wire up the dependency injection and remove any unneeded references. If there are any questions in the chat, I'd be happy to take them. If not, I can call it a day. Bring my new screen up. Should keep the microphone on so I can at least talk back, if not chat back.